Let's look at the sponsors for tonight's Hazmat Guys Roundtable. Hazmat 101 Consultants. Hazmat 101 Consultants and their instructors can provide quality consulting and virtual in-person hazardous materials training for your agency. Owner and lead instructor Bob Cascignano is also available for lecturing at your fire or hazmat conference and has in fact done many speaking engagements across the country. Visit their website at www.hazmatconsultants.com or email Bob Cascignano at bob@hazmat101consultants.com. For over 20 years, K&R Plaques have had the pleasure of helping clients choose awards for the people they want to honor. Their state-of-the-art equipment allows clients to design, customize, and personalize the awards they choose for that special somebody. With one of the largest selections of plaques, awards, trophies, and clothing apparel, they can deliver quality products to satisfy any customer's needs. No order is too big or too small. Visit their website at www.knrplaques.com or email them at sales@knrplaques.com. Intercontinental Fire Training Academy is an education institution that has 3 branches of education: Hazmat, Technical Rescue, and Fire. They offer approved curriculum for you or your agency. Examples of a few of their classes are HazWhopper, Rope Rescue, Fire Officer and Driver, and much more. Training can be conducted at their facility or they can come to you. For more information, visit them at www.icft.academy or call them at 305-450-4530. Responder Training. RTE is the leading company in delivering propane training along with emergency response equipment. Responder Training has many propane flaring kits, water injection kits, accessories, and replacement parts available. They also sell the only commercially available 1-inch propane flare kit, appropriately named the Dragon Slayer, because size does matter. Contact our good friend, owner-instructor Ron Huffman for more information. You can reach him at 765-524-4848. You can email Ron at respondertraining.rdh.gmail.com or peruse his website at respondertraining.com. If you would like to sponsor the show and help keep live hazmat conversation coming in the future and help send at least one lucky participant to a national level hazmat conference, send an email to bob@thehazmatguys.com and he'll send you the information. Thanks. Now on with the show.
Welcome, Hazmateers, to this episode of the Hazmat Roundtable 2.0, the only interactive show that lands on the X and in the hot zone where everybody has a seat at the table. I'm Bobby Salas, and I'm along with the other regulars, Mike Monaco, Bob Cascignano, and Jay-Z, Jeff Zintak. And we have 2 special guests here. We have Bill Hand and Bob Royall. Welcome, guys. So, without much ado, why don't you guys kind of let everybody know who you are. We'll start with, I guess, Bob.
Oh, goodness. Well, I was going to yield to the elder statesman, but I guess I'll go ahead and go. I'm Bob Royall, currently Assistant Chief Emergency Operations for the Harris County Fire Marshal's Office in Harris County, Texas. We call Houston our suburb. So we're down here in Southeast Texas, and my first almost 31 years of my career, I was with the Houston Fire Department. The last 10 and a half or 11 years with the Houston Hazmat team as a senior captain, kind of as operations officer. Known Bill Hand for a really long time. He's one of my mentors. I owe a lot to him for teaching me the ropes, if you will. Had a lot of mentors along the way, but I consider him absolutely one of my greatest mentors. You might ask, what does a fire marshal's office has to do with hazardous materials? Well, in 2002, after the events of 2001, the Board of County Commissioners here decided they wanted to enhance the hazmat response capabilities within Harris County. And they wanted to put a hazmat team in along with Houston, which was well established since '79. And so they tried to figure out where they were going to put it because there is no county fire department in Harris County. There's 54 different fire departments. and none of those were quite able to support a hazmat response capability. So instead of putting it in the sheriff's department, the commissioners decided to put it in the fire marshal's office. So the Harris County Fire Marshal's office is kind of like a fire department. It has all of the elements, with the exception we don't do fire suppression or structural firefighting. So that's a little bit about me. That's where I'm at. Currently serve on NFPA, what's fixing to be 470, but 472. Chair of the IFC Hazmat Committee and have since Mr. Butters went to Washington after John Eversole. So that's about me.
Your cohort, how are you?
Oh, good. I'm Bill Hand. I got involved with the Houston Hazmat team in 1979. I had been in the fire department about 5 years and was happily driving the district chief at Station 1 in downtown Houston, having a ball doing that. And Chief B.E. Rogers at the time told Chief Max McRae that he wanted to have a hazmat team for the city of Houston. And I've heard a lot of myths and over the years about why we have a hazmat team. And the real reason we have a hazmat team is because Chief Rogers was at an IFC conference and he heard Ron Gore speak. And, it sounded like they were doing a pretty good deal there in Jacksonville. And, of course, Jacksonville didn't have near the hazmat that we have in the Houston area. So he came back and told Chief McRae, Chief, I want you to put together a hazmat team. And Chief McRae was the kind of guy that when he got an order like that, he made sure that it was done and done well. And so it was quite a decision for me to decide to move over off of that nice job of driving the district chief. But we started out as a heavy rescue and a hazmat team. I thought, boy, that's right up my alley. That sounds like a lot of activity, and we're going to get some really good training out of it. So I chose to do that. And 26 years later, I was still in the hazmat team when I retired. So we got our initial training from industry, basically, because we didn't know what we needed to know. At that point, there wasn't a 472, there wasn't an OSHA 1910-120. There were really no standards out there about what a hazmat team needs to know. So we got almost all of our initial training from industrial hazmat teams right here in what we call the chemical capital of the world. They had always had established response teams to respond to products and mutual aid through our SEMA, Channel Industries Mutual Aid Organization down here. And we got some excellent hands-on training from some real old-timers in the business. And so, like I said, I stayed on the team until I retired in 2005 and failed retirement within about, 2 months. And there just happened to be an opening on the Harris County Hazmat team for a captain. So I applied for it and I got it. And I went over there and I was a captain on one of the shifts for a couple of years. And our shift over there was kind of crazy at that time. So I went to Bob and I said, Bob, I think I've been to enough diesel spills in my career. So is there anything else I can do? So I kind of took on the training role of the training officer of the hazmat team. So I've tried to stay connected, both from the industrial side of training and through the fire service side. So I guess I'm probably more retired now than I have ever been. But I still hang in there and try to stay connected, up to date, and all that sort of thing.
I have a question for you, and we ask this for basically every single guest that comes on the show: is where do you see hazmat going? Like it's come quite a way, and I think we all know it was kind of like the Wild West back in the 80s and 90s when the formation of hazardous materials response was coming to fruition. But like, where do you think we're going?
Well, I think we're going in the right direction. Greg Knoll, I've heard him say it before, and Greg and I have talked about it. Back when we got started in 1979, we didn't know what we needed to know. And so now we do, and we're much better organized now than we were, so we can do maybe a 120, 180 hour hazmat tech class now and cover almost all the stuff that it took us several years to cover because we really didn't know what we needed to cover. So through incidents, case studies, NFPA 472, and some other standards, we're really headed in the right direction. I think we're a lot more organized in the direction we're heading now. Technology is something that's really stepped in there. We were really, really hands-on oriented back in the day. And so now we're replacing some of the hands-on stuff we used to do just from the risk-based responses we're doing today that we used to not do back in the beginning. We used to just jump right in the middle of it and hope it came out. It was kind of the man and the challenge back in the day, and not so much anymore. And it's a miracle we didn't get killed back in some of those early days with some of the crazy things we did.
And I tend to agree with Bill. I think we're heading in a great direction. Our responders are much more educated today. And this is like generation 3 of Hazmat when it got started. And the men and women that are in Hazmat response now come to us with a lot of formal education. They come to us able to operate many of the high-end technologies. All they have to do is add the real intelligence, because our instruments and our technologies today tell us a lot, but they don't tell us how to make decisions. And so I think we're heading in a great direction. We have a fairly young team in Harris County, and they're well educated, well trained, and eager to learn every day. So I think we're headed in a great direction. And if you stop and look at where we've come from, it's amazing that we've made it, the advances that we've made in such what I consider a short period of time, going back to 1986 and that era.
What would be some of the foundational things, if you could go back in time, creating the foundation for Hazmat nationwide? There's got to be some things looking back that you're like, wow, man, I really wish we had done that a little different from the start. If you could go back and kind of reform the foundation, what would be one of the things that you would change from the beginning? Well,
I think the risk-based approach is the thing that I would want to change. Like I said, we were in that the man and the challenge thing. We'd jump down holes with natural gas leaks and, without thinking about the risks that were involved. And that's definitely something that I think we should have done a better job of back then, but we just didn't know back then. With the whole fire service has changed since then. We're using a risk-based approach fighting structure fires now.
Right.
We used to not. When one of the 5 years I spent before the Hazmat team, Bob can tell you, we considered ourselves in Houston a very aggressive interior firefighting organization. So we just charge into things and not even think about the risks that we're involved and the benefits going to be derived. So we're fortunate that we didn't get some people seriously hurt back in the early days doing some of the stuff that we did.
Yeah, and risk-based response is very, very important. I know Bill and I have had long talks about this, and same way with Greg and Mike and those guys. We just threw caution to the wind in the early days, plain and simple. We were pretty much bulletproof. And going back, I wish we had started with risk-based response and built on it, because we've come so far. The risk-based response foundation would have gave us an opportunity to hone our skills and for us to have institutionalized our systemic change from the very start. Now we're trying to turn this battleship third generation in, and it's a little more difficult whenever our new Hazmat responders don't know and understand the way it used to be. So I wish I could take today, go back to 1986 and start at this point. I really do, because I think our best years are ahead of us yet in this response discipline.
Hey, Chief Royall, 475.
Yes.
I understand you were author of it a little bit, and can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, 475, and I must say that I was a co-author. So you won't see my name in there as an author because NFPA doesn't do that sort of thing. But we had some really bright minds that came together. In fact, we had about 18 writers, technical writers on the committee from 472. And so what happened was that we had met outside Chicago one year, and I'm going back now a ways, so bear with me here. We had met in Chicago to make a determination whether 471 was still applicable or not. And of course, where all great decisions are made, we're sitting in the bar, and Tony Musafiti, myself, Rick Emery, Glenn Rudner, and a bunch of us, and we're going, wait a minute, you know what's missing here? A program document. Okay, we've got a lot of how-to documents, we've got competencies, but how do you start with a program? Where do you start from scratch? So we had some great writers. We actually met at the Rock in New York and got up on a dry erase board. And like I said, about 18 of us. And we had a couple of outside subject matter experts that joined us for that meeting. And we started, I guess you would say, dividing topics into big buckets. And we learned right quick that, hey, if we had a document that says, where do you start to form a hazmat team? Because things had changed since 86. There were a lot of areas that had grown. A lot of areas had now hazardous material interface, a concern. Petrochemical industry, rail, the different modals of transportation. And so that's how we kind of developed it. And once we got these topics developed, then we started to develop an outline. And we started putting some meat on each one of the topics. And then we divided it up. And everybody took a piece, which is amazing the way it turned out. And I guess you would consider me the editor. All of that data came in, and we spent sometimes up to 12 hours a day. And we didn't have Zoom at the time, so it was on conference calls. And but we spent up to 12 hours a day figuring out where we need to go. And then Tony, Glenn, and myself, let me back up, Rick Edinger, we took all of the stuff that they had written, and believe me, they wrote volumes. And it came in, I think the training chapter at one point, we'd enlisted help from our brothers over at the FBI, and I think that thing was like 186 pages long, just the training chapter. And so what we had to do is distill it down, and if you are the mayor or county commissioner or city manager in your jurisdiction and you decided, I need a hazmat team, kind of like Chief Rogers did when Bill was talking about a while ago. Well, it starts with assessing what your risks are. And so that's where we started. And then we took it all the way through to the end without, internal and external influences, budget, inventory control, training, regs and standards, all the things that you needed to know in order to have a hazmat response program. So that's kind of how we hatched that thing. Very proud of it. In fact, we just went through our first revision after the original adoption, and there were only some superlative changes, no meat and substance changes to 475. The committee said it's a great document. Let's stay with it. We'll tweak it if we need to in the next revision cycle. So while I'm not the author, it's got my fingerprints on it.
Very nice.
So both of you, staying with the NFPA 470, 472, 475, how important is it for the people out there in the teams to understand this document and kind of make sure it's implemented into their team? I talk to Rick Emery all the time, who I consider in my world, like the NFPA god, and knowing all the chapters and whatnot. But is it important and how important is it for the teams out there to dive into that and make sure that they're covering a lot of that stuff and implementing in their team?
I'm going to yield to Bill first on that because he is quite the training guru, and he for many years has lived and died by 472. I'm going to kick it over to Bill, and then I'll add some color commentary.
Well, like I said before, we didn't have any guidelines back in the day about what kind of training we needed. So basically what we did is looked at what the hazards were that we faced. And of course, in the Houston area, we have just about every chemical known to man, just about every type of transportation, container, chemical process. So we have it all. So I would say that all of 472 applies to the Houston area. I mean, everything in 472. The problem that I've run into doing training all over the country, and especially in industry, is not all of that applies to everyone. You know, like you go to some industries and they don't have rail cars, they don't have tank trucks, they don't have a lot of the things that are required training in 472. And so, you know, they say, hey, we want a 472 class. Well, if they want a 472 class, and Steve Storman used to joke with me all the time about, you know, we don't have ships in Phoenix. And, you know, marine transportation is one of my specialties. So why teach a hazmat team person about ships in Phoenix, Arizona, when they don't have ships? So I think the challenge is taking 472, which is full of really good stuff, and applying it as needed to the people that you're training. Does that make any sense?
I like
Absolutely.
it. Yep.
So let's talk a little bit, because 472 has been what I consider the parent document, but it's written in competency style. Okay. And so it tells you all the things that you need to train to. And it gives you some examples and some laundry list of things that you need to train about. Well, we got into this pro-qual discussion, and I watched Greg and Mike, and I know there was a lot of conversations about standards and such. But we got into the situation where that, okay, 472 tells us what ought to be in a training program. But what about professional qualifications, a testing document, if you will, to test skills and requisite knowledge? So along comes 1072, which was hatched from that. So I think while 472, in my opinion, it's the holy grail, there's a place for 1072, and certainly there's a place for 475, and there's a place for 473. All of those are critically important. However, at the end of the day, there was a lot of confusion about 1072 versus 472, because one was a professional qualifications document and one was competency standard, okay? Training standard, if you will. So I'm sure y'all have heard, those are all being rolled into one standard that's going to be called 470, and the chapters are going to be arranged in such a fashion to where that you'll have the training competencies. The chapter right behind it will have the pro-qual testing requisites, if you will. So, and that's for hazmat response and EMS response, by the way. 473 is being rolled in there as well. 475, because it's a recommended practice, is not part of that document. And so it is a standalone program document. And whenever you start talking about why is it important that the students know, they need to know why they're being taught and why they have to learn certain things. And if it's in the book, like Bill said, it's easy to customize that to your risk of your, wherever your area is at. But if it's a training competency, then it may or may not be part of your training based on your location. But then there's also going to be a testing chapter to come along behind it to test your requisite skills and requisite knowledge to see if you learned what the training course taught you. So I think it's really important. Certainly they're general consensus documents. They're not laws, but they're pretty strong. And they've been adopted by many hazmat response communities around the country, including Department of Defense.
Yeah, and I think we've pretty much done that in the Houston area. I think another challenge is the state of Texas, the hazmat tech certification program is 80 hours. In Houston, we always did 120 hours, plus a lot of other training. So it's always been a little stressful to me to say that we've got a tech program that's 80 hours or 120 hours. But if you use the documents Bob's talking about, then you can design your program for however many hours it needs to be to get the point across to the people that you're working with. So that's kind of my idea about it. And so, but it's not over just because you went through a 120-hour course or just because you went through an 80-hour course. And that bothers me sometimes because some people think it's over at that point. Well, and we make it very clear to our students that this is, we're just giving you enough information to go out and hopefully keep you safe for a while.
That actually brings me to my next question. I want to totally kind of take that and veer off with it. Every learning point in my career has been due to some kind of a screw up on my end in one way or another. So, and I'm sure a lot of the points that are taught to me in class were from somebody else's screw ups. And I always love to hear those moments, those calls, those runs that was like the, for lack of better words, the oh shit or the holy shit or wow, I shouldn't have done that. Or, hey, I just learned this moment. So I would love to hear some of your moments, some of your lessons learned moments in your career.
Well, there's so many, I don't even know where to start.
Let me throw a couple at you. Because one of them, Bill, saved my life, I'm convinced, okay? I was a young station captain. I bet I hadn't been captain for, gosh, I don't know, maybe 3 months. And I responded to, on one of the local expressways, not an overturn, but a tank truck carrying flammable liquids, known as naphtha. And there had been a valve sheared off, and I had my team, we're in bunker gear because that's all turnout gear. That's all we had, being firefighters. And I had limited hazmat training at the time. So we're gathering up and grabbing everything that we can to possibly stuff in the hole to slow the leak down until hazmat could get there. And we're taking a full body bath in an extremely highly flammable liquid. And when it was over with and I got the lecture from the hazmat team, I went, I need some hazmat training. So that's one of them. Another one, and I'm going to actually use the name of the laboratory. I don't think they can sue me at this point. I think they've even changed names, but there was a laboratory in South Houston that did testing, and it was called Caleb Brett. And having been an engine captain for about 10 years at that point, we responded to Caleb Brett laboratory, which is on fire. And the local small department that had responded was pouring millions of gallons of water into this building. And so, as Bill said, we're pretty aggressive interior firefighters. So, we're bulletproof. We got turnout gear on. We did have on air packs, but we're wading about knee deep in all kinds of chemicals. And those are some of the prettiest cranberry and green flames that I've ever seen in my life. And I'm thinking, wow, don't put that out, man. That looks really cool to my team. Well, I could hear this voice from the door. And by the way, this is just before I went to hazmat. But I could hear this voice from the door, Bob. I think, that kind of sounds like Bill Hand. And he goes, come here. So we went sloshing through the water and got over there to Bill, and he goes, excuse my language, but get your ass out of there. There's a chemical dictionary worth of chemicals inside that building. And it's a wonder that y'all are still alive. So we came out and, of course, immediately went through some aggressive decon in the street. 32 of us ended up in the ER that night as a result of exposure to chemicals. And not only did we end up in the ER, we went there contaminated and shut down the ER.
Wow.
So you want to talk about screw up. That was one of the worst screw ups I've ever been involved with. Well, me and Bill been in a couple of others, but anyhow, you learn. And like you said, Mike, you learn by other screw ups and other people's screw ups, and you go, oh, I'm never going to do that until you find yourself in that situation. And that's an oh shit moment, I promise you. So, Mike Callan has a great line. We learn in two ways. We learn by education and experience. And which one of those do you think leaves scars? Yeah, experience.
Very true.
So I got a couple of scars, but some of them I owe to Bill Hand.
I don't know. I have a few scars from some very boring instructors.
It seems like, we always call Bob a fecal. Well, we didn't use the word fecal. We used another word, a fecal magnet. And it seemed like once Bob came on the team, we started having disaster after disaster. And I guess Bob had a lot closer call than I did at the market, what we call the Market Street fire. And it was another chemical warehouse. I don't even remember. Bob, do you remember how many chemicals were in there? 120 or so?
North of 120. Two different warehouses. One was 5 acres of warehouse, and the other was 7 acres. So two very large warehouses.
This thing had been burning for several hours already, and I just went to the scene out of curiosity. I went to take some pictures. Is the reason I went. It wasn't even on my ship. And so one of the deputy chiefs, assistant chiefs, I had my coveralls on. I was walking around taking pictures. He said, "What are you doing here today?" I said, "Well, Chief, I just came down here to take a few pictures." He said, "Well, you can take your pictures, but you're on duty right now." So he just pressed me into duty, and so we started doing some research, and the other shifts were working, and everybody was pretty worn out at the point. And Bob made a narrow escape when some flammable liquids ran out of a warehouse and burned a batter truck and everything else up. But this is kind of well into the fire to the point where everybody's kind of tired, you're kind of worn out, and but you're still looking for stuff. So unbeknownst to us, we entered an adjacent warehouse. Now, this warehouse was a concrete wall warehouse, and the concrete was spalling on the wall of the warehouse because of all the exposure of the heat. So we go into the warehouse. Of course, the electricity's off, so we've got some lights, and we're probing around in the warehouse to make sure what's in there. And 12 inches from the wall, where hell has been going on for about the last 4 hours, there's pallet stacks of organic peroxides. And that was definitely an eye-opener.
Wow.
And so, came back out and we talked about it and said, we made a decision at that point because we hadn't been doing too much exposure protection at that point on that building because there was just so much other stuff to do. We had just about everything committed. So we came to the conclusion that we're going to switch some exposure protection over to that building because if that building blows up, it's going to take all of us out. We either have to just abandon ship and move off the property or do some exposure protection. So that was a pretty close call. And I guess the second one was a ship fire. And even though we have a huge port, we don't have much training as far as marine firefighting. So this particular ship was called the Seda. It was at a shipyard, and some welders caught it on fire. And it was about 3 blocks down the street from the fire station. And it's very unusual for the hazmat team to be first on the scene to anything. As we're pulling up in the parking lot, it sounded like 2 jet engines going off on the hulls of the ship. I mean, literally, there was fire, loud, a roaring sound coming out of the holes on this tank ship. And I remember thinking when it stopped, well, if it didn't blow up then, it's probably not going to blow up. So it's one of those things where you get there, you really don't know what's going on. And we just had a number of those that we skated by. And I told somebody before I retired, I said, if I get killed on the job, it's not going to be some terrorist incident or some exotic chemical. It's going to be a damn natural gas leak. We're going to be going up there inspecting, checking out a natural gas leak, and the building's going to blow us away. So that's just one of many. And I know Bob and I could sit here all night and tell you tales about crazy things that have happened. Well, we had a lot of activity. And I told people, if you want hazmat activity, Houston's the place to be.
If I go back to Bill's story there about the Market Street fire, that was actually a 7-alarm fire in Houston, which means most of everything was there. So the warehouse started, it's kind of an L-shaped warehouse, and it started right in the bend of the L. And we had 13 pieces of equipment between 2 very narrow warehouses, and we thought we were making great progress, and I had the hazmat sector. And so it kind of jumped our master streams and got away from the ground firefighters. And the district chief, God rest his soul, he's dead and gone now, but he said, "Captain, I want you to make sure everybody is air packed up. Everybody's packed up, full bunker gear, even on the outside, because this doesn't look good. It looks like there's a lot of chemicals involved. So I, on foot, went down truck to truck, unit to unit, man to man, told them to hook up their packs, and they were doing pretty good until I got to the very back end of the warehouse. And there was a lot of drums of motor oil that was stored in that part of the warehouse. And as they started to burst, they looked like Scud missiles taking off. And what goes up comes down, and it was falling all around us. And I looked up, and there was a sea of burning motor oil come across the loading dock down onto the runoff water that, it was probably about calf deep, and it run up underneath the ladder truck that I happened to be standing on at the time and caught the truck on fire. And there were 11 men that left out of there on foot, the last 11 out, wading through that material. And a tilt wall fell, and fire rolled out of the initial building, cutting us off from the street. And so we dove under some box fans that were there. Little did we know they were full of ambient temperature organic peroxides, but we dove underneath those trucks for shelter. And whenever it kind of subsided just a little bit, all 11 of us ran for our life. And a few hours later, after we had evacuated, we went back, and every one of those trucks were destroyed from explosions and fire. So, yeah, close call. You talk about reading smoke. Structural firefighters talk a lot about that. Thank heavens that the district chief, the incident commander, was able to read the danger associated with it. Because if he had not pulled the trigger when he did, we probably would have lost 13 pieces of equipment and probably 100 firefighters.
Wow.
Guys, right before we wrap up, there was one quick question that we can probably get a short answer to. Is when is the expected release date of NFPA 470?
We expect it to be on out early next year. I think it'll go to print October, November timeframe, but it takes a while for it to get into circulation. The second ballot has been taken. Now, I will tell you this: there was some conversation about when you take 3 documents and blend them into one, sometimes things get lost on the cutting room floor. So there was some conversation about a TIA to address the things that maybe were not correct or that got missed. So that may slow it down a little bit, or a TIA may be released at the same time. All
right. Well, on behalf of us, the 4 of us here, I'd like to thank Bob Royall and Bill Hand for coming on. Tremendous assets for the community and great information. You know what? We might have a mega, like maybe a year end where we get all of the guys that we've had on for the show for
that would be great.
A large show. You know what? That's a great idea.
That's a great idea.
See these things pop up right here. So you're watching it right now. But thanks a lot, guys, for coming on.
Thank you.
Great stuff, and we'll see you guys out there. Thank you.
Well, thank y'all for having us.
Enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.